Good morning. This is the Florida Department of Health. Hold on one second. We have been having some technical difficulties, and now I'm getting some feedback, so hold on. Okay, I'm going to need to hang up and dial back in. Sorry.
I think the audio pin, did you enter that one?
Oh.
Okay, it should be working here. You want it muted?
Good morning. This is Bonnie Bailey, Florida Department of Health, Biomedical Research. We apologize for the delay. We've had some technical difficulties, and it looks like we have about 23 people on the line, or 23 callers. Today's webinar is intended for new grant awardees and other key representatives that are going to be working on your research grant. Anyone who supports the initiative, the management, and the closeout of the research grants, hopefully is in attendance. The agenda for today's webinar is to provide a brief overview of the program and to spend the majority of the time discussing the grant startup, guidance, reporting criteria, and tips to assist you in submitting the required paperwork. This is our way of trying to answer questions that you have so that we all get started off on the right foot and reduce any kind of back and forth with processing invoices. The important thing about this webinar is that you are encouraged to send questions to the webinar chat mailbox throughout the webinar, and we will answer all questions. After the webinar, we will post the questions and answers on the Biomedical Research website found at flhealth, as in floridahealth.gov. Okay. So first, we're just going to give you an overview of this year for our grant application process. Excuse me. We had a total of 156 Bankhead Coley grant applications. We were able to fund 15 of those, and with the amount of money that we had, for those of you for anyone who was not funded, the peer review comments were submitted to them for their review, and something important to note, and especially for the any SROs that are on the line, for reapplications, we've noticed that there's a much higher percentage of someone who reapplies in being funded. So now all of the grant applications are blinded. The department never knows the information pertinent that would identify anybody, and that is also true for the Biomedical Research Advisory Council. They are not privy to that information either. So the awards are made strictly on the peer review scores, 3 independent peer reviewers, and then we use a peer review panel to come up with final scores using the NIH criteria. And then the Biomedical Research Advisory Council reviews the scores and makes the funding recommendations, and then the department finalizes the awards.
I thought you were still, I thought you said Bella.
Yeah, okay. Bella's in its 2nd year, and the Live Like Bella Research Grants Initiative is named after a girl, Bella, who lost her life way too early to cancer. We are now in the 2nd year, and we had a total of 18 applications, and 10 of which received funding. For Live Like Bella, right now the funding is at $3 million, and for Bankhead Coley, it's approximately $10 million. For those of you who may be wondering about our King, James and Esther King research grants, those are required to be finalized in Florida statute by the state surgeon general, and so they will be finalized after the appointment of the state surgeon general. Okay, so we're going to spend some time now in talking about some details. These are the details that will assist you in better understanding our terms and conditions, the deliverables that are required. Because these are state funds, we have additional reporting requirements than we know NIH and other federal funds. But so think about it as you would want your tax dollars paid or spent wisely, and so that's the reason for the quarterly invoicing and progress reports, and we'll get into that. I'm now going to turn it over to Karen Schneckenberger, who is our budget lead for the biomedical research section, and she's going to talk about the pre-execution.
Good morning. Along with your award letter, you should have also received 2 attachments to that. The first item is a financial conflict of interest form that must be signed by the PI. This also applies to their immediate family and other personnel that are working on the grant. If there is, by chance, there is a financial conflict of interest, there must be an administrative process in place to identify and resolve any items that may affect the objectivity of the research. It's very important to protect the grant from bias. All right, secondly, there is a very good chance that the award amount is less than what was requested on your grant application. Please do not be alarmed or take this personally. This is simply a means to be able to award more high-caliber research grants. If this is the case that you find yourself in, a revised budget and budget narrative based on the actual awarded amount will have to be submitted. In addition, there may be a need to submit revised aims in cases where there was a significant reduction in the requested grant application amount. However, please keep in mind that these changes should not change the original intent of the research project. After all, this is one of the reasons why your research project was selected to be funded. Now, for the Bankhead Coley and Live Like Bella grants that we're talking about this morning, the mechanism of support will indicate the maximum duration allowed for your grant. Now, for Bankhead Coley, it ranges from 6 months for a bridge grant to 5 years for a clinical research grant. Live Like Bella is a minimum of 6 months for a bridge grant to 4 years for a multi-center clinical trial. Your particular grant manager or grant liaison will ask you what is your preferred grant term, keeping in mind the maximum duration allowed. And please note that the term can be less than the maximum. That's totally up to you. One of the things that we ask you is to please don't change the budget categories that are listed. Do your best to fit your expenditures into these particular categories. Also keep in mind, this gets to be very confusing for people, that the budget presentation that's reflected on the budget form is in a state fiscal year basis, which is July to June. For example, if you have a 2-year or a 24-month grant, we're already into the end of March now, so let's say your grant will begin maybe around the 1st of May. So your first state fiscal year, in this case, would only be 2 months. It would be May and June of 2019. The second column that you're looking at would be a full state fiscal year, 12 months, July to June. And the third column would only have 10 months. It would be July 2020 to April of 2021. But if you add the months across, 2 months for year 1, 12 months for year 2, and 10 months for year 3, you're still at 24 months or 2 years. So it's just a slight change in presentation. But I do want you guys to know that the budget is going to be monitored at the total approved grant budget categories and not by the individual state fiscal years. This is definitely going to reduce the need to submit budget change requests over the course of your project. The second item I want to talk about is the salary has a cap. It must not exceed the Federal Executive 2 pay scale, currently of 2018, with a maximum 3% annual increase. And if you Google it or pull it up, you'll be able to see it. That particular amount is currently $189,600. Okay. The institutional approvals for human research subjects or live vertebrate animals is very important. We need to make sure that the IRB or IACUC or even the IBC approvals are in place before you start your research project, or at least before you start on those aspects of it. If you don't have the approvals currently in place, please work in doing so as soon as possible, and keep us posted over the course of the project as you are starting up, please keep in close communication with your grant manager or liaison regarding the status of those approvals. And something also very important is that the title on the IRB approval must exactly match the title of your awarded project. Those two titles must match exactly. We've had several questions regarding this. Well, I already have approval for this, but it's not exactly the title of the project that was awarded, so those two must match.
Okay, thank you. And I just want to piggyback on what Karen was talking about. So when our grant files are audited by, it could be the Department of Financial Services, it could be by the Attorney General's office, or even Department of Health contract unit staff. It sets up red flags when the titles don't match. And then they really question whether is the approval for the research study that we are funding or not. So Karen made a really good point. Everything needs to match up. All right, I'm just going to, and this is Bonnie again, I'm just going to spend a couple minutes talking about some definitions. These definitions you will see in your terms and conditions. So the department biomedical research section is part of public health research. So you'll see the Florida Department of Health, you'll see the department, same thing. The public health research, biomedical research section, program, could be referred to as program. So you'll see all these different terms interchangeably, but it's all the Department of Health, and then it's all about you. Okay, let's talk about the grant manager. The grant manager is the number one point of contact for the grantee, and the grant manager is the individual who will know the most about your grant award, who can assist you with any questions that you have. We're going to show a slide towards the end that will once again reiterate who the grant managers are for the different research grant awards. And we will also list the grant numbers next to that, so you'll have it. I wanted to bring up a new concept, well, a couple things that we're working on. We're trying to assign the same grant manager to a research institution, so that the grant manager can build a rapport not only with the principal investigators and support staff, but also with the sponsored research office, as well as key budget folks. And so that relationship is really key. And once again, if you have questions, we would much rather you give us a phone call or send us an email so that we get it right the first time and there's less rework. So please, we would much rather talk to you in advance. Now, I serve as the administrator over biomedical research, and there are several research grants, particularly this year, that list me as the grant manager. But you will note that there will also be a grant liaison, which will be assisting you. And whereas I'll be the final signatory, they will be your go-to person, and we'll make sure that you have their contact information as well. Okay. state agencies typically have contracts with organizations for different services. For research grants, we use terms and conditions. It still has all the deliverables, all the requirements. It reflects your budget that has been approved by the department. It provides information or reiterates what your research grant is focusing on, and is a legal binding agreement. This is also where you will find information about, if you get follow-on funding while you have the grant, if you get federal funding, how to, when to contact the department. So there's a lot of administrative information in the terms and conditions as well. It's important for anyone who has a hand in your research study to really know the terms and conditions. So we're asking that you make sure and share that with all the key staff. Property and equipment, we list this here. It's an area where many times the budget, we have to send back the budget, we can't approve it. So basically property and equipment, and we're not talking acreage here for property, we're talking about things. So it's property and equipment if it's $1,000 or more. So that would be more like a laptop or a high-end piece of equipment, as compared to, let's say, purchasing pipettes. And I only use that because it's a term I remember from chemistry. But anyways, I'm kind of joking there. But anyways, that would be more like a supply, right? So equipment over $1,000, the big purchases, that would be listed in property and equipment. Also in the terms and conditions, you'll find your payment schedule, you'll find deliverables, your reporting deadlines. Karen had talked about the quarterly payments and how to break out your budgets. And so when your invoices and quarterly reporting are due, will be outlined in your terms and conditions. Okay. It all starts with, as mentioned before, that you'll need to submit your final budget and budget narrative, and indicating the length of time for your research grant. I review all of those and approve them, and unless there is something that is not allowable, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Well, I'll go ahead and give you an example. The state of Florida will no longer reimburse for international travel. So if you're going to a fabulous conference in Canada or a conference in New Zealand, the state of Florida will not pay for that travel. Okay. All right, so after the budget and budget narrative are reviewed and approved, the terms and conditions will be drafted, and the budget becomes part of the terms and conditions. And once again, we talked previously about the payment schedule is included in the terms and conditions, and it's actually the attachment 2. So once again, so you see how it all ties in together. Important to note, the terms and conditions routes through about 5 different entities, or I'll just say offices here at the department, and then comes back and is uploaded into DocuSign. DocuSign is the preferred method for electronic signatures. That is how the department executes the terms and conditions. Please note that your terms and conditions for you to begin the award does not go into effect until you receive a copy back with both the research institution signature and the Department of Health signature. It is the Department of Health signature that executes the terms and conditions. Go back, please. So the execution and of your terms and conditions, as we are now in the last week of March, all grants must be executed before and encumbered before June 30th. Encumbering is something that we do here that alerts the Department of Financial Services of a new grant award. But it has to be executed before June 30. These are state funds, and if state funds are not encumbered, they are forfeited and they go back to the state. So we have a hard deadline here, and we know we're running just a few weeks behind. The hurricanes didn't help, so wanted to make that very clear for your planning. Also, the importance of DocuSign. As grant managers, DocuSign allows us to monitor each step in the execution process. Why is that important? Because if we see that it has been sitting in someone's queue for a review and approval for several days, we can reach out to them and help clarify any questions that they have, or make sure that it's not at the bottom of their inbox. So DocuSign is very important, and it also lets us know when the receiving institution has the document as well. And there have been situations where we've actually reached out to the SROs and just to see what's going on. Once again, trying to get it approved as quickly as possible. All right. The attachment 2, talked about this a little bit already. It will list your schedule, your quarterly schedule. It will outline what's required. The attachment 2 is really, really important so that you can understand when reports are due and invoices are due, and it'll keep you within the time frames. All of that is outlined. We pay on a fixed payment schedule. So for your 1-year budget, we're going to break that down into quarters. And so you'll have the same allotment. Now, as Karen had mentioned, the first quarter is going to be shorter, but it all works out. The final payment is when we reconcile every payment or every purchase that you have made, every expenditure over the life of the grant, and through the reconciliation, we determine your final payment. So, just as an example, if your grant was for $1 million and you ended up only spending $900,000, then your invoice would be reduced by $100,000. Okay. These are a listing of the deliverables. And of course, they all have their pre-populated or their forms, and we're going to show you where all the forms are located. So the quarterly deliverables, we talked about that. That'll be the progress, for your research grant, it'll list publications. Oh, okay, yeah, go ahead and flip it. Okay, it takes a village. Here we go. All right. Oh, well, actually, can you go back? Yeah, here. Okay, so you have your quarterly deliverables. Annually, and once again, you'll see this on your attachment too, is the annual Florida Legislative Report. What is that? Well, we are required by Florida statute to report on the progress of all of the research grants. The criteria that we are now required to report over the last couple of years is a whole lot more than what was previously asked for. We want to know about your publications. We want to know about presentations, any training of pre- and postdoctoral students, collaborations, as well as your progress. Now, it's important for you to put this in layman's terms. Remember that the legislators, because this report goes to the Speaker of the House, the Senate President, and the Governor, but they are not researchers. So it's really important for you to write it like a general audience abstract, so that whoever is reviewing it can understand at a very basic level what you're working on. We have had situations where, or examples where we've actually seen some of the wording that we've had in our reports used in other legislative reports. So they do look at these. Because of the reporting changes, our legislative reports have basically gone from 20 pages to 120. We report on every single research grant, that the new grants, the existing grants, so multiple year grants, and then any grant that closed during that year that we're reporting. All right, then the final deliverables is a good summary of all the great advances that you have made during your research, and once again would have comprehensive lists of publications, if you have received additional new funding, and collaborations and all the other things that would be in the other either quarterly reports or the annual legislative report. Budget categories are monitored, and if you find as your research progresses that you need to spend more money in one budget category and less in another, that has to be prior approved. If it's not prior approved, the Department of Financial Services and our own Department of Finance and Accounting, as well as your grant managers, will note it, and there's no way that we're going to be able to get it paid. So we're going to talk about budget change requests in a little bit. All right. So what's in the quarterly report? Showing significant progress. You're going to have an invoice. You're going to have your financial report and your expenditure tracking logs. And we're going to show you examples of those.
We're just looking at the budget. The completed budget. We're not looking at deliverables.
Okay. All right. Let's talk about budget expenditures. There are some instances where we will need additional documentation. Participant payments. We have spent a lot of time educating the Department of Financial Services on what is a research participant incentive. And think about it in that there really is no other research grant programs in the state of Florida. So educating them on what your research is all about, we've spent a great chunk of time over the last year particularly. So for participant payments, you can only use gift cards. Now, and you cannot issue more than $36 per day for a participant incentive. Now, participant incentive is not medical costs. This is a true incentive. You will need to submit your IRB approval, your protocol and your consent forms, your approved consent form that identifies the research participant incentive. Okay, and then you will need to submit a payment log that indicates for each participant the dollar amount that they received for a visit. We do not want personal information. So if you use some kind of a numbering system, that's fine. If you do have your logs by name, please redact the names. We don't want names. Travel, we are limited to $150 per day for hotel. And you will need to submit a travel form that is signed by you and your supervisor. Tuition. We have to be able to submit documentation. So for any tuition costs, we either need to see the course description or the class schedule. Now, why? We have been informed that the department needs to show that the tuition is related to something that will assist the research team and the person receiving the education to work on the research project. So they don't want to pay for a physical education course. They want to see where research methods is what the tuition waiver is being used for. And that's only one example. But just as an example to kind of understand about what they are looking for. Any subcontract has to be pre-approved, and we need a copy of that subcontract for our department file. It is highly encouraged to subcontract within the state of Florida. If it's out of state, you're going to have to show justification. They're the only laboratory in the country that offers this service, or the only laboratory that can meet our expedited time frame. Okay. And now I'm going to turn it over to Teresa Matthew.
Actually, you're on the annual deliverable. So.
Oh.
And then I'm
okay. Okay. All righty. So the legislative report is due July 31st. And so, yes, you will be new and you won't have that much to report on. However, that's the way that we will frame that section. We will indicate. Okay. But we will indicate that you were awarded in the last quarter of 2018-19. We also must, let me go back to the annual report. We need all acronyms spelled out. even if it is a pharmaceutical, highly technical. Once again, the legislature wants to know what you're talking about. All right, certificate of liability insurance, we need to have that on file. You know, depending on what year it expires, we need to make sure and always have the current one on file. Let's talk about the final deliverables. Final deliverables, once again, final cumulative grant progress. We want to know. We want to be able to brag about you. And if we get any legislative requests, as an example, we had a legislator from a certain county inquiring about research grants that had been awarded to the research institution in their jurisdiction. So, you know, that kind of information is really important. Okay, and then we talked about the final invoice. We're going to do a reconcile, and then the final financial report, and the final expenditure tracking. And once again, if there are any questions, please submit them to the research inbox. And now I'm going to turn it over to Teresa Matthew.
Okay. We'll talk a little bit about any sort of change requests that might come up throughout the course of your grant. It's understandable that the plan that you had set out when you submitted your proposal and when you started out with your research project might change over time. There might be unexpected expenses. There might be things that would come up that might require a change in key personnel, etc. Please bear in mind that communication is key to the success of making sure that this moves smoothly. So if there's going to be a change in key personnel, you need to let us know. All of these changes need to be approved by the department before you can move forward with implementation. So, for instance, if you have a change in your budget, as Karen mentioned, your budget categories are only going to be monitored for the whole budget amount for the life of your grant. But if you are going to go over one of your categories, you need to submit a budget change request. That can be submitted at any time during the life of your grant. A lot of people submit them with their quarterly deliverables, but that's not necessary. It's a very simple form to complete, and we'll be walking you through the grant management forms library toward the end of this presentation so you can see what these forms look like. The one thing that I have encountered most frequently that has required me to send back a budget change request to the grantee is that they haven't provided enough information about why it's needed. So please be sure to provide sufficient justification for the budget change that you're requesting. The other one, the next one that we're going to talk about is the change in key personnel or change in effort. This might require an amendment to the terms and conditions. For instance, if the PI who was on the project when the project was awarded, if they are changing institutions, the institution is the recipient of the award, not the PI, and so a new PI will need to be assigned to that grant. So that would require a change to the terms and conditions. Others, if there's a significant change in effort for the PI, that might also require a change. So please be in contact with your grant manager or liaison. They'll be able to walk you through the steps of that process if you have any questions. The most recent one that we've encountered, the protocol change request, and this is something that we developed a new process for recently. If as you are working through your research project, you're realizing that some of the aims that you had originally outlined in your proposal are no longer aims that are really practical for you to pursue, or if you're realizing that it would be most efficient for you to pursue a different route with this research, you need to inform us immediately. There is a protocol change request form that is available in our grant management forms library, and we'll walk you through where to find that and what's required in it as well. This could require an amendment to the terms and conditions as well. And then a no-cost extension. So if you are coming to the end of your scheduled grant term, as is outlined in your terms and conditions, you need to be watching attachment 2 for the deadline to submit your no-cost extension. So you can get up to 6 months additional time if you submit your no-cost extension request by the deadline that is outlined in the terms and conditions. That will require a change to the terms and conditions. An amendment will need to be processed. And so that's something, again, that your grant manager or liaison will be able to walk you through. And all of the forms for that are also available in our grant management forms library. Financial considerations for prompt payment. Your grant manager is required to review and approve invoices within 5 working days. It is so important that you follow the submission deadlines and the requirements that are outlined in the terms and conditions, and especially pay close attention to attachment 2 and the deadlines that are outlined there. If you submit a packet of deliverables but it's incomplete, we can't move forward. If all of the pieces are there but there's something that is not correct and needs to be fixed within the budget forms that you submitted, that also means that we can't move forward. So we're checking for your arithmetic and the budget documents that you submit. If the progress report does not show sufficient progress, that could also be a delay. If there's not a lot of information there, we might send it back to you and ask for more information. So there are all sorts of things that need to happen at the front end before we can even pass it on to the next player down the line in order for this to get approved for payment and then paid. So some of the things that are common delays that might, hold up the process of this. If you don't have sufficient participant incentive documentation, as Bonnie mentioned earlier, we would need, at the front end, we would need a copy of your approved IRB protocol. We would need a copy of the IRB approval letter. We would need copies of your incentive logs with all of the identifying information redacted. So that sort of stuff needs to be submitted at the same time that you submit your deliverables packet. For your travel, make sure that your travel voucher is completed correctly. Make sure that you are including, for each expense, it needs to be a separate line. You can't be lumping all of your travel stuff into a single line. So hotel and airfare and all of that needs to be separated. And you need to be sure that you're including as much backup documentation as possible. As far as tuition, as Bonnie said, you also need to be providing the course schedule. We don't even necessarily need to see the name of the student, but we do need to be able to provide some sort of documentation as backup when we pass this down the line for approval. For financial consequences, this is an unfortunate thing, but it is something that can happen, and it is outlined in your terms and conditions. Failure to comply with all deliverables required will result in financial consequences of 10% per invoice. So what would this include? It could be a failure to secure appropriate institutional approval, so make sure that you have your IRB or IACUC or IBC, all of those things, we need to have documentation of that. If you are late in submitting your deliverables, again, check your attachment 2 and make sure that you're adhering to those deadlines. This is so important. Lack of scientific progress. We are reading your progress reports. We have in-house experts who review these on a quarterly basis. And so if they don't think that you've been doing the work, well, it's going to result in a financial consequence. And then lack of prior approval. Those change requests that we talked about a few slides back, those are really important, but we need to have those documented ahead of time before you implement any of these changes. So please be in communication with your grant manager or grant liaison and make sure that you're submitting those change requests and that you received the approval before you implement any of those changes. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Karen Schnegenberger again for some final reminders.
Okay, you guys have heard this before, and you're going to hear it again. Become very familiar with your terms and conditions. We cannot say this enough, especially Attachment 2, which is the schedule of deliverables and payments. This is going to tell you what's due, the period covered, and then the actual due dates. It will keep you out of trouble. It's also a good idea to consult your corresponding funding opportunity announcement and the grant administration manual. The sum of these three resources should be able to answer almost any question that you might have. All three of those are filled with very valuable information. But if you would actually like to talk with a real live person, we are here for you. We are always available to assist you in any way that we can. You can either email us at the research inbox or call us at the number indicated. Just please keep in mind that we're here to assist you as you make your way through your research project. All right, the next page is a list of grant managers and grant liaisons that we've mentioned. Bobby indicated we're trying to move towards consistency in the grant manager and institutions. And so you can see who has been assigned to your particular institution. Additionally, we have also provided Bonnie's contact information, and she, of course, is always available to answer any questions, comments, or concerns that you might have. Okay, these are your go-to documents. We've got the funding opportunity announcement that was mentioned, your grant terms and conditions that you might have heard a couple of times. We have a grant forms library for your convenience that will always have the latest and greatest version of forms available for you. We also have the grant administration manual that has been mentioned. And then last but not least, please keep in mind that your DOH grant manager or liaison is always available for you as well. So we've got a whole plethora of information available for you at your convenience. I believe we're going to take you to the grant forms library in a second.
Hold on. So flip back.
Okay, here is your grant forms library. We keep current at all times. You can be guaranteed that this is the most recent version that is available out there. We've got it broken down into categories for you: the grant change request forms, the quarterly deliverables, the annual forms, the final grant forms, and then we have a informational section on the travel. We appreciate your patience as we try to keep up with the change in guidelines that the Department of Financial Services goes through periodically. A change in CFO recently. We had several changes that have taken place that kind of caught us off guard in the middle of some of our research grants that we're still trying to work out. But one of the new requirements that they now have is that all travel expenditures must be on a state of Florida voucher. And we've included an in-state version as well as the out-of-state version.
Okay. Do you want the in-state one, Karen?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. We know this is an additional burden or hardship for some of the institutions. Some of the state agencies are already familiar with this and probably have to do this anyway. But this is the form that is required. It looks confusing, but I want you to know that we have also included in that list of information for you is guidelines that will walk you through literally every section of what goes into the travel reimbursement. It really breaks it down and makes it much more user-friendly. If Teresa will go to the next page, it's got the reference numbers there for you to tell you what goes into that field. So hopefully this will be helpful to you. It should be a useful document. Once you've done it, it should be a lot easier the second time that you have to go through this.
Karen, can I just ask a question? Okay.
Sure.
So towards the bottom on the left, there are different budget codes.
Right.
They don't have to worry about
No, they do not have to worry about the budget codes at all.
Sorry. Thank you.
Not unless it's required for their institution, but we will not be paying attention to those.
Okay.
The important thing is that the expenditures are broken down by category, and then it's signed by the traveler and then their supervisor. Those are the types of issues that we'll be looking for. Oh, do not put the traveler's social security number on there. That is not needed in order to get this paid. Okay.
Anything else in the form slide?
No, I don't think so. There is an other resource section. Governor Scott wanted to have open books, wanted to show that the state of Florida's taxpayer money was an open book. He instructed the Department of Financial Services to create what is called FACTS, or the Florida Accountability Contract Tracking System. You need to know that all of your grants, your research grant, will be included in this database. There is a public view where anybody who wants to go in here can look and see what your grant is about. We have the link for the Florida vendor payment information if you want to look up to see when your payment is coming, how your payment is coming, how much your payment will be. That information can easily be looked up with the Department of Financial Services link there. The grant administration manual that we have mentioned is attached for your convenience. It should have also been attached to your award letter.
Yeah, the link was included.
Okay, great. And then we have the reference guide for state expenditures. If you have any questions, this resource should be able to help you. We do have to abide by the Department of Financial Services rules and regulations.
Could you just open up the quarterly report so they can see
Sure. So which one do you want to look at? The progress report or?
Yeah.
Okay.
there's a very good chance that multiple individuals will be assisting in the preparation and submission of the quarterly and annual deliverables. Usually the PI or research assistant will put together the progress report. Your grant financial support system will usually piece together the financial report. So it's definitely a team effort on both sides to put this information together.
Oh, and please be sure that you have the appropriate signatures on all of your reports before you submit them.
Yes.
So once again, this link has everything that you need, and some reference material as well. There is a chance that some of these deliverable forms could in fact change. So always refer back to this link when you're getting ready to submit your next deliverable. Changes result from the Department of Financial Services or within the Department of Health. So it's always good to take a look there. Okay. And
that brings us to questions.
Okay.
So there's been a couple of questions about the slide set. The slide set is currently available in the handout in the webinar itself. So you can download those for your reference, the slides as well as an example budget, which we can go through that too of a completed budget, just to kind of show you what we're expecting from one of those. And then there's also, we've included the instructions for completing the State of Florida travel voucher. So this one's pretty simple. As Karen stated earlier, we follow the state fiscal year, and so please be categorizing your amounts for each of your project years by the state fiscal year of July 1 through June 30th. Please follow our categories. And don't invent something new here. We really would appreciate if supplies are supplies. You don't need to tell us what sort of supplies here. That's what the narrative is for. So, and make sure that you have the appropriate signatures before you submit this to us. The budget narrative will have a breakdown of all of the personnel salaries that will be received throughout the life of the grant. You'll tell us who the person is, what their role is, their effort, the base salary according to the federal executive pay scale that was in place at the time that you submitted your proposal, not at the time that you were submitting your newly revised budget. So the pay scale that was in place when the FOA was released is the pay scale that you need to be using. Indicates the fringe amount, and then here you show the exact amount of project salary per year, the amount of fringe by year, and then the total personnel costs by each project year. So please complete one of these tables for each project year that you will be working on this. Then we get to the narrative bit. So for each of the people who was in the table, please complete a brief narrative of what their role will be on the project. And even if there isn't somebody assigned to the role yet, like here we have a research technician. They haven't hired anybody yet, but we need to know what their work will be. And then each of the categories that follow match up to the categories ta-da, in attachment 5A. So this here is the big picture, high level, sky view of everything. And then in the narrative, we have all of the details. And this is really important that we have, especially for instances where you're going to include incentives or travel or any of those things that we talked about earlier that have been requiring additional documentation. You need to have that outlined in detail here so that that's another level that we can show we have been scrutinizing this and approving it and making sure that you're following the rules. So, yeah, Karen.
As they say, the devil is in the details. With the change in the Department of Financial Services guidelines, there has been a need and a request from them to send in the budget narrative along with the deliverables packet. They want to see an expenditure was thought about ahead of time and was actually approved by the department as an expenditure. So there have been times where we have had to submit these budget narratives to the Department of Financial Services in order to get a payment made.
So yeah, detail, as much detail as you can provide, please do. And so that's one of your handouts. That's in the webinar itself. If you want to download it, we'll also make that available on the program website afterwards if that's something that you want to show to other people or share around. That is perfectly okay.
All right. Any final questions? All right. Well, I would like to thank you for your time. And Teresa, if we could just end with the slide that has all the different grant managers and liaisons.
Sure, of course. And just as a follow-up to, gosh, this mouse is being weird. Just another reminder, we will also be posting the recording of this webinar on the website. So if a colleague of yours missed it and they would like to listen to all of this, or if you want to share that with anybody, that is definitely something that can be done. We'll be uploading that in the very near future.
Okay. Well, thank you for your time, and I hope that you were able to learn something new that will help you. And once again, here are your grant managers and liaisons, and with that, everyone have a great day. Thank you for calling in.